Hey everybody, welcome to USA Wrestling's National Coaches Council Heads Up podcast, brought to you by the National Coaches Education Program and the Greg Strobel Leadership Academy. I'm Mike Clayton here with Mike Haggerty. Let's talk coaching.
Coach Haggerty, why don't you take it from there? Because that's the first time I've done the intro and I'm freaking out a little bit.
That was awesome, Michael. That was absolutely fantastic, man. I think I'm going to go back seat from here on, and you're just going to have to drive this thing. So
No, sir. Actually, that's a good thing we've got the guest we've got, because he could just take the ball right now and run with it for, I don't know, a couple hours for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's a pleasure, and thanks for introducing us, Mike. I know that you have some history with Rob, who is our special guest today. Rob Skinner, it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to meet you and have you on the Heads Up podcast. I'm so excited about this because this is an area that's very true to my heart in regards to nutrition and basically human performance across the line. I know you have a wide swipe of expertise and experience in this area, and you being able to share that with us today with some of our coaches and our folks that are tuning in, we certainly appreciate it. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Mike and Coach. It's great to be here, even if I'm calling all the way from Germany. So it's all good.
Yeah, I just asked you that question. What are we about 8 or 9 hours separated, and you're deep into the latter part of the day and to the early evening. We're pretty much in the early part of the day, so we appreciate you jumping on. But Rob, it sort of in a nutshell, tell us a little bit about your background. I know, again, we talked a little bit before we got started. You have such a wide swipe in the areas of sports nutrition and human performance. Tell us a little bit more about what you've done over the years and where you're at today.
Yeah, that's the easy part, talking about myself. So I started in the profession in collegiate athletics. I am a registered dietitian and a certified strength and conditioning specialist. And then I got my graduate degree in exercise science, and I'm a certified exercise physiologist as well. And so through 13 and a half years in college athletics at Georgia Tech and at University of Virginia, after that, I got to work with a group of Navy SEALs in Virginia Beach, and then got an opportunity to go to the NFL and work with the newly designated Washington Commanders. And then I got a call about working with the U.S. Olympic Training Center and Olympic and Paralympic Training Center now. And it was really funny because the dietitian that called me, who was leaving to go to the NFL, she said, "You'll get to work with sports that you've never worked with before." And she was right, because it was acrobat combat were the sports that I got to work with. And so I got to work with wrestling, obviously, was a primary sport for me, but wrestling, judo, boxing, taekwondo, karate, fencing, diving, gymnastics, synchronized swimming, and then they added surfing and skateboarding. So I got a pretty wide scope of Olympic sports that I had the pleasure of working with. And obviously my primary travel was with USA Wrestling, USA Judo, and USA Boxing. So I spent a lot of time in saunas around the world for 6 years. Yeah, so it was fun.
There's so many areas and avenues I'd like to go down with you, Rob, but to kind of tee this thing up, let me ask you a very broad question, one that is sort of always a challenge when it comes to athletics and performance, when you tie in the nutrition element. Why is nutrition a factor, and why is it so important that we understand how it actually helps, hurts, etc., in the area of all levels of sports, whether it's youth level, high school, professional, etc.? Why is nutrition important, and why are we even talking about it?
Well, obviously being a dietitian for 25 years, I think it's hugely important, but it goes beyond opinion, right? There's a t-shirt out there that says nutrition's a science, it's not an opinion. And we have scores of research and data to support why nutrition is helpful. And in a nutshell, the reason it is helpful, and you've heard this a million times, and the athletes have heard it too, food is fuel. And it's not just fuel, but we are made up, our tissue is made up of amino acids, and amino acids come from protein. And there's essential amino acids, which means essential in the nutrition world means you don't make it in your body. You have to get it from what you eat. And then there's essential fatty acids. Again, you don't make these essential fatty acids. You have to eat these foods to get these essential fatty acids. And fatty acids are important for hormones and anti-inflammatory processes and all kinds of things in your body. And lastly, the third macronutrient is carbohydrate. And carbohydrate is our primary source of fuel. And this is what people really get confused about. It's our primary source of fuel when we are at high intensity.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're operating at 70% or above your maximum capacity, you are utilizing carbohydrates for your primary source of energy. This is why we can't just say, I'm not eating carbs. Now, we'll get to that in a second, but you can't just say that, because vegetables are carbohydrates and fruit are carbohydrates and milk has carbohydrates in it. So what Americans mean when they say they're not eating carbohydrates, it means they're not eating bread, pasta, rice, or potatoes, right? No white foods or whatever mantra they want to go on. But the reality is you have a finite storage of carbohydrate in your system for these explosive, and this is where the wrestling, explosive outputs of energy. I was just talking to someone today about wrestling, and because there's a lot of, where I work now, there's a lot of people who do jujitsu and things like that. And I said, you've got to understand that it's not just being out there on the mat. It's going 100% every time you get your hands on someone, especially at the Olympic level. But every competition, wrestlers go 100% all the time. So anyway, when we talk about carbohydrates, we have a limited source of fuel tanks for those. And this is where the confusion goes in. Yes, if you fill up your car and park it in your garage, you don't need to fill it up every day, right? But if you fill it up and you drive it 100 miles an hour for 2 hours, you are going to have to refuel with carbohydrate. That's your primary source of fuel for that activity. So again, a long-winded answer. The reason why nutrition is important is because we need those essential macronutrients, the essential fatty acids, the essential amino acids. We also need micronutrients, vitamins, minerals for growth, for energy production, for immune system function. We have to have vitamins and minerals, and we get those primarily from our food. And I know there's plenty of supplements out there, multivitamins, Flintstones, whatever. Not that I'm sponsored by any product, but there's plenty of products people use to supplement, but supplements are no substitute for good nutrition through food. They really aren't. So
absolutely. One of the biggest myths, and I'm sure we can get into this a little bit deeper as we go in, but one of the biggest myths that you hear from a lot of athletes is that, Coach, I really don't, pay that much attention to my nutrition because I burn it off. And especially in wrestling, where weight is a factor, and guys are constantly looking at their weight issues. What would your comment be to those guys and ladies that say, hey, I don't really need to pay that much attention to it because I just burn it off? And I think I know where the answer will probably land, but I'm going to let you go with the obvious on this one.
Well, I typically, you're not saying anything I haven't heard in 25 years, from NFL players to Navy SEALs, to USA Wrestling. It's very similar. Why should I listen to you about my nutrition or I got here doing this, so why would I change? That's what I got a lot. And the question I always come back with is, are you good because of what you do or in spite of what you do? And you might just be so talented, so amazingly talented that you are kind of out training your diet, your meal plan. But the reality is very few, that 1% of people are going to be able to out train that for time. In their youth, in our youth, people tend to, your metabolism is very high because you're in a growth phase, like teenagers, right? They're growing. So they eat a lot of stuff. This is absolutely not a free pass to eat whatever you want. If you're between the ages of 13 and 18, this is not it. But your metabolism is running fast because you're growing. And so, yeah, you might have a little bit more of a window of where you can make mistakes, right? Nutrition, a little outside the what we consider good. But as you age and as you train, those lines narrow, and you have a smaller window of where you can go left or right of what we consider good nutrition. And this is why we not necessarily in sport, but when people get older, we look at chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease and things like that. And that's because they've spent a lifetime. It's chronic for a reason. It takes a lifetime to build up and cause a problem. So, and it's the same. Like we've seen, not necessarily in elite level athletes, but we have seen young children with plaque in their arteries because of the way they eat, versus we may have people who never have any kind of cardiovascular risk factor, but still have issues because of the way they eat. So we know that obesity, this doesn't affect wrestlers necessarily until they retire, but we know obesity is an epidemic in the country. 40% of our children are obese. It's about the same percentage of adults are obese. We need to get a handle on having good nutrition practices. And I used to tell the military people I worked with, or I still tell the military people I worked with, if you went to the range every day, would you get better? Would you shoot better? And the answer was, yeah. And I said, well, if you went to the range 3 times a day, would you get better? Yeah, it'd be crack shot 3 times a day. So, but you have 3 times a day to practice good nutrition practices, and you choose not to. We've got to practice good nutrition. It doesn't come easy. And a lot of places, it's I say this a lot where I'm at. Environment drives behavior. So you've got to look at the fueling or feeding environment. A lot of what I did when I traveled with USA Wrestling was try to create an environment wherever we were in the world where they could get optimal nutrition. So sometimes that meant me and Coach Zadek and Coach Russell trucking down to the local grocery store in Guatemala and getting as much fruit and water as we could, clean water, so that we can make sure our guys and girls were healthy and had what they needed to compete. So that's why nutrition is important. Nutrition, we have to have a positive nutrition spin. Environment drives behavior. If you have the food, if you have the junk food in the house, I don't really like to name stuff like that, but if you have food that's not so healthy in the house, you will eat it. Don't have it there. Environment drives behavior. Use it for special occasions. Go get it when I would never tell someone not to eat birthday cake, like unless they have a competition coming up. But I would never tell them not to eat birthday cake. But I would say you don't eat cake every day. You have it for a special occasion. Like that's how you should treat those kind of things.
Robbie, one thing that I really, it's that coach well-being piece. You know, you mentioned how like sometimes after we get done with our competitive career, maybe our habits from those young years when we were burning a little bit faster, we don't make that change. We don't make that pivot. Could you talk a little bit about that coaching environment and how important? I mean, I'm trying to put on weight.
Yeah.
with some health issues I've had, I'm trying to add it on. And I know that some coaches out there are trying to take it off, and they're struggling with that too. So how do we get this information to coaches, and where's a good place for a coach to start so that they can be the example they want to be for these athletes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there are many. The first place I would check is, I'd go to a dietitian that could possibly help you. Dietitian. My philosophy has always been, and whether it be with one of the national team members or anyone, is let me see what you're doing now, and let's see what strategies we can make improvements with. It's not necessarily an overhaul. It's usually there's some things that people do habitually that they may be unaware of. It's a concept called mindless eating, and you've heard a lot about mindfulness, about getting into the zone and mindfulness. Well, we should be mindful when we're eating too. We should eat with a purpose, right? We should sit down and eat. Some of the things I see coaches doing that I would say is wrong, but I understand, again, environment drives behavior, is coaches got practice. They got to run from the office to practice. They go to practice. They're not eating anything. They may not even be drinking anything, no water or anything. So then they go from practice to a staff meeting or teach a class or whatever. And it's a fasting cycle. They go through the whole day fasted. They get home, they open the refrigerator, and they eat everything that they see, right? Because it's always going to be a fast, then a binge, and then a fast, then a binge. What we have to do is we have to break that habit and become more mindful about what we're eating and how we're eating it. I just read a study about military personnel that says that the habits that they learn in basic training about eating so fast can actually set them up for having issues in later life, because when you're mindful about your eating, you eat slower. People tend to eat slower, they tend to gain less weight. If they eat faster, that old adage where you've heard it takes 20 minutes for your brain to signal your stomach that you're full, or your stomach to signal your brain. This is kind of true. And so what happens is if you get in that habit of always shoving food in your face as fast as possible, you will eat more because you're not full yet. So you end up eating more quantity. So I'd say the three things I would tell you that coaches should pay attention to for them and their athletes is quantity, quality, and timing. If I had to boil 25 years of sports nutrition into 3 words, those are the 3 words. Mm-hmm. The quantity of what you eat has to match your output, or be a little less if you want to lose weight, but it has to match your output. The quality of what you eat should be fairly good. And that means you don't, a documentary or a mockumentary, whatever you want to call it, came out on Netflix, and everybody wanted to go vegan, which is not a bad lifestyle, but everybody wanted to go vegan. The thing I would ask them is it's okay to have better quality food, but you don't have to go so far to the extreme. You can have quality foods and not be vegan. But if that's what you choose to do, let's do it the right way. You can't substitute potato chips for meat. That's not an appropriate substitute. So you end up with all these, especially in high school, you end up with all these junk food vegans. They're like, oh, well, there's nothing I can eat here. I'll just eat French fries. That's not appropriate. That French fry is not giving you the protein you're taking out of your diet to not eat meat. You're going to have to eat beans and legumes and nuts and those tofu and tempeh and all of those good, healthy, non-meat protein products. But too often I would see young college and high school athletes that would say, oh, well, I'll just eat French fries. again, not appropriate. Okay. It's not appropriate. You're going to have to substitute like for like. But the third one is timing. And timing is pretty important, especially in sports. Like, we want to make sure athletes refuel, rehydrate post-practice. We want to make sure they get appropriate protein in, carbohydrate, fats. We don't, and we want to make sure the timing is good. There's a big thing right now with the with protein intake. A lot of good studies going on, and people are experimenting within the sports world. But basically, they're trying to, or what we're trying to do is, protein seems to be better absorbed and assimilated if we do it in smaller amounts more frequently. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to help people understand that if you split it, whatever your protein needs are, and it's easily enough calculated, but you can calculate your protein needs. And then if you spread it out over the course of the day versus having one big protein meal, you tend to get more benefit from the nutrient from protein. So it's a big thing right now, is split it up into 20, 30 gram doses. It doesn't mean every meal has to only be that. It just means like split it up. Because if you have a 300-pound defensive, offensive lineman, if you split into that means they eat 10 meals a day at 30 grams. And they're so big, they can absorb more. I mean, so again, it takes a little bit of art with the science to make sure that it works for people. But for someone like you, Mike, if we calculated your protein needs out, I would probably say, hey, you're going to need to make sure you get something in the morning, and then possibly 2 snacks, and then lunch and a dinner. And so you're looking at, instead of calling them 5 or 6 meals a day, it's really 5 feedings, and you're feeding your body, throughout the day. And it could be a bar, it could be a shake, or it could be one of those feedings. But we have teeth for a reason. And I like to encourage people just to sit down and mindfully eat a meal.
Rob, would it be fair to say, I have worked with a lot of athletes. I've also worked with clients in my health coaching business. But the concern too, I think, is that we have to be real careful when we talk to people, that we are differentiating what actually is really good for athletes and performance versus just the general population, who probably typically overeats. They typically aren't like Mike, that are in, calorie reduction, or are needing more calories maybe in their diet. Mm-hmm. The average person, and coaches included, because I think too many of them resort back to when they were athletes and their feeding habits at that particular time. The average person probably needs to take a little bit different approach than somebody who's looking at this for high performance levels.
Well, it's interesting, because some of the people I work with now are definitely not at high performance mm-hmm. levels. And but using some of the strategies that we use with athletes and turning it a little bit to use with general population, I call it Gen Pop, right? So with Gen Pop, you still have to make sure they get an appropriate protein, carbs, and fat. We just don't need as much.
Right.
Most people, non-athletes, we'll just call them non-athletes. Most non-athletes are think they're athletes, number one. Number two, they overestimate how much they do, and they underestimate how much they eat. Mm-hmm. And so those are some kind of teaching points, is we have to get everybody to understand what is normal serving sizes, especially an athlete that retires. That's kind of a big deal, because if it's a wrestler, a football player, whatever, like, they've been eating to maintain a certain mass, and now maybe they don't need that mass anymore. And so the successful ones shrink their portion size down and change their workouts. Mm-hmm. Coach, you're right. Like, the people who need to lose more weight, it's not that strength training is good. We know strength training is good, and strength training helps that lean mass, and that lean mass increases metabolic rate. We want to maintain as much lean mass as possible. However, some people definitely need more conditioning than they do strength training. And so I think trying to see what phase they're in, we have I have two strength coaches I work with, and we'll alternate through endurance phases and strength phases. Now, we never take strength out of it. We never take endurance out of it, but what we emphasize changes on a block basis so that we can, and we do body comp so we can check how it affects that person. So if you're responding really well to the strength training or the strength phase, and your muscle mass is going up and your fat mass is going down, we may leave you in that phase a little bit longer, or vice versa. If the endurance phase, your fat's going down, you're maintaining your lean mass. But too many times people, and especially former wrestlers, boxers, judo, they think they've got to go do long, slow distance, and that's the only way they can lose weight. And we know that intervals and high intensity circuits are great ways. I mean, wrestlers know this because they do it a lot. But then you get out of shape and you can't do a high intensity circuit anymore. And so your high intensity circuit becomes a low intensity circuit, and then it becomes nothing. So getting people to where they can understand that they have to adjust how much they eat to what they're doing activity wise, not their job, but their activity. So that activity is going to drive quantity of what they eat. So at least for me, for my practice, that's what I think is most important. And for Gen Pop, definitely the overestimation. I mean, I have people coming to me all the time and go, well, I walked. And I'm like, yeah, but there's no intensity to that walking. Walking's great. Walking is a great activity for you to do, and it's easy and everybody can do it. And it's good. You're going to have to either increase duration, which means you got to walk for a long time, or you increase the intensity and you do it for a short time. That's intensity and duration. That's the keys.
It sounds like the mindset of each individual is so important in this. And maybe you can help me verify. I had somebody tell me that when you walk into the pantry and you're looking for food, that it's really the gut bacteria that's kind of telling your brain what you want, because whatever we feed the gut bacteria, it tends to want more of. Is that?
Well, there is a huge relationship between, they call it the gut-brain axis, okay? And there's a huge relationship to the microbiome in the gut and body weight. And they've taken some of the research out there, they've taken fat rats and they've taken a sample of their gut microbiome and put it into thin rats, and the thin rats become fat, and vice versa. So what we know is your gut bacteria is pretty powerful. It is influence a lot of things. They're connecting it to mental health as well, depression. They're connecting it to physical, obviously. It's still a very emerging science. I wouldn't say that's a simplified way to say, when you walk into the pantry, if you're craving something, your body is telling you want it. Now, certain things it's pretty interesting. Like certain things we know that's true about, but certain things we don't. I mean, we don't know about everything. You may just be craving chocolate cake because you like chocolate cake. Your body doesn't need chocolate cake, right? But for instance, you guys have probably heard this or know this, but if a pregnant woman, well, obviously a pregnant female is chewing ice chips, that's typically a sign that there's a mineral deficiency. And there's a thing called pica, which is craving eating something that's not a food item. Like, and it's typically dirt or clay or detergent, things like that. When women get pregnant, they crave these things, and that is a sign of a mineral deficiency. And it's pretty well known in the labor and delivery communities and the dietitians that work with that population. I ran into it once when I was in clinicals years ago, but yeah, it's really wild how your body does. And you guys have experienced this. I know, being wrestlers, like you taste something with salt and you're like, you just want more of it, right? But probably because you were cutting your water too much, or you're a little dehydrated, whatever it is. but yeah, your body does have these feedback systems, and there are so much we don't know about how that craving works. But listening to your body is a good idea. It's hearing correctly, I think, is the thing. So there's a big community of people that we've forgotten how to listen to our hunger cues, and so we eat a lot of at times when we're bored, and we eat at times when we're stressed, and we eat at times that don't make sense for nourishing our bodies, but that make sense mentally for us to, stress or whatever. And so that's that mindfulness, like being able to know, am I hungry or am I just passing time? Not that this is all pretty well documented, but for me, I'm a bored. Like, I get bored, I open the refrigerator and look in the refrigerator, and then I stand there and go, what am I doing? Like, it's like 2:00 in the afternoon. I'm not hungry. Like, I'm about to go work out. Who cares? So yeah, we have to listen to our hunger cues. And we really mess them up, as adults especially. We really mess them up because, and I not to bash the school systems or anything, but we really mess them up because we don't allow kids to get water. We don't allow kids to have snacks. We don't allow kids. They get to high school and all of a sudden everything's banned, or you can only get stuff out of the vending machine, and you can't bring your own stuff with you, and so. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I consulted with a high school and I said, well, can't they carry a water bottle with them because they're going straight from class to practice, and they're like, no, because they're afraid they'll put something in there that they shouldn't have. And I was like, well, like, so you'd rather them show up to practice underhydrated and potentially risk an injury than just give them a water bottle. So those kind of things are frustrating. And I understand that the world's not perfect and people do stupid things. But it would be nicer if we could make sure that we get our athletes. I've always been an athlete advocate. I want the athletes to have what they need so that they can compete to the best of their ability, no matter what level. And it hurts my heart a little bit when they say, well, we can't give them a snack because it's a waste of money, or they can't have water because we're afraid they'll put something in it. So, I don't know. But hunger cues. Like, we've got to listen to our hunger cues, and we do a lot to dampen those by, well, I'll eat lunch in an hour, and then in an hour you're not hungry anymore, and because you missed your opportunity, and so then our appetite hormones go up and down all day long. And they've done, and I know I keep going back to studies, but I like to read studies, occasionally. And there's a study that shows like 3:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon is when most vending machines get hit the hardest, right? And it's funny because to a person, I'll have people come in and they'll tell me how they eat. And I said, well, do you ever get hungry at 3:30 in the afternoon because you ate at noon and then you're not eating again till 8:00 at night? Like, that's too long. Our bodies tend to cycle through these hormones every 3 to 4 hours, and which is interesting because we typically have like 8, noon, and then we go, 6 hours to the next meal instead of, that 3 hours is 3:30.
That's where that snack for an athlete, even for the coach, just grab something small, a granola, anything, right? Peanut butter and jelly, is that okay?
Yeah, it's perfect. I love peanut butter and jelly as a snack, and I would say it would help everybody, like, especially if practice is at 4, just get a little something. Let's just talk about coaches, especially for the coaches. Keep your mental focus. Get some water. Get a half a peanut butter and jelly. Even if you're trying to lose weight, get half a peanut butter and jelly. Get something in your system so you can maintain that focus. Our brains are glucose or sugar machines. Like our brain runs off glucose. It wants glucose. You get it. If it starts going down, like we have a backup for if we have too little, like our liver has glucose in it basically stored. And so your brain, if it doesn't feel like it has enough glucose, it will shut you down. That's why you pass out, right? Because your brain is like, I got to protect myself. All these other functions have to disappear. Walking, everything else goes down. So I need to breathe, I need my heart to beat, and I need my brain functioning. Those are only things I need to happen. And then everything else is a waste of time if for the brain if you don't have enough glucose. So your body will take over if you force it to. It's not a good idea, but it will take over. So yeah, listening to hunger cues, getting a little snack in the mid-afternoon, just keep your focus, keep you sharp, keep you going at practice. I think that's a great, and it doesn't have to be big. You know, when I say snack, I mean anything under about 300 calories, right? Like anything under that. If you get to 500 calories, considering that the lowest amount of calories per day for an average guy would be about 1,500. So if they had 3 meals a day, that's 500 calories. So a meal should be about 500 or more, and a snack should be like 300 or less. That's just a Rob Skinner rule of thumb. That's not in the literature anywhere.
Hey, Rob, I really picked up on your thoughts in regards to your three, sort of in a nutshell, suggestion, your three major points in regards to this topic of nutrition. When you mentioned quantity, quality, and timing, I think those are incredibly valuable. Any other nuggets of wisdom in regards to like packaging this information for coaches? Because let's face it, the majority of our coaches here are not coaching national team athletes. The majority of our coaches here are dealing with the magnitude of youth level, high school level, where the parental decisions weigh heavily on not only the purchasing, but the preparation, the timing, and everything else for our athletes. If you could package that and put this into the Reader's Digest version, what would that message be in order to make something of value for this segment of our population?
So I'd say focus on what you can have, not what you cannot have, right? So focus on quality carbohydrates, fruits, well, in order, vegetables, fruits, starches, cereals, grains, breads, dairy. Focus on what you can have. Focus on lean proteins. The less legs, the better. So you go beans, fish, poultry, up to red meat, right? Lamb, beef, pork. Then
no five-legged cows.
No five-legged cows. Take those. Those have probably been over near a nuclear power plant. So go focus on lean proteins. Focus on optimal or adequate hydration. Adequate hydration. Just getting enough water in a day is a great tool. Focus on healthy fats, not avoiding fat, but getting the essential fats in, getting that avocado, the vegetable oils, getting those healthy fats in so that we make sure we get what we need in the anti-inflammatory department. And then as far as fat's concerned, having butter or salad dressings are fine. Just they shouldn't be. They are flavor enhancers. They're not the meal. Don't eat a bowl of dressing and put a piece of lettuce in it.
Like, you watch what I eat. Is that what?
Yeah. So it's a flavor enhancer. It's not the whole meal. So I would say focus on those. They focus on quality carbohydrates. Focus on lean proteins, healthy fats, adequate hydration. You can't go wrong with that. Mm-hmm. You can't go wrong with that. And if somebody says, to me, well, I have a gluten allergy or a dairy, lactose intolerance, that's fine. We can get all of our nutrient, even if we have to pull some of those things out. It may not be as easy, and you may need some strategies to do it, which you can get from a dietitian or a health coach. But you may need some strategies, but you can do it. Like you can take gluten out if it's necessary, and you can eat fine without that. Okay, it may make your peanut butter and jellies not taste quite as good, but there's a lot of gluten-free products out there. So it's interesting to me. Well, going back to that's what I would say. That's the Reader's Digest version. That really is it. Lean protein, quality carbohydrates, lean proteins, healthy fats, adequate hydration, and exercise. Like exercise. Those things, those are probably the top five things to do to make sure. And again, the reason I always go vegetables, fruits, and then grains is, and Mike talking about gut bacteria, people underestimate the value of fiber. Fiber is the original prebiotic. Fiber helps produce vitamin K inside your gut. Fiber is fuel for that microbiome in your gut. Getting enough fiber, which only about last I saw, about half Americans get the adequate amount of fiber a day. But getting that fiber in can not only help prevent chronic disease, but manage weight, give you a feeling of fullness, and help with glucose control. So fiber is super important. If people would count fiber instead of counting carbs, they probably would be better off. Mm-hmm. But fibers, and where do you get fiber? Vegetables. So again, it's not telling us anything that our grandmas didn't tell us, right? Eat your vegetables. Like, vegetables are super important, not only from a micronutrient standpoint, from vitamins and minerals, but also from a high fiber standpoint. And like, if we're going to go down the calorie, if we're trying to lose weight, vegetables have 1/3 of the amount of carbohydrates that starches do, a potato. So broccoli versus a potato. So in a serving of broccoli, you get 5 grams, and in a serving of potato, you get 15. So not only have you reduced the amount of starches you need, depending on your activity, but you've also reduced the amount of total calories by 2/3. So vegetables are super important. And again, in the United States, we don't eat enough vegetables. We don't get our adequate data. We tried for the Strive for 5 campaign. We tried for all these campaigns to try to get people to eat fruits and veg, and we just can't package it in a good enough way that people will realize that it is probably it shouldn't be just a side product on your plate. It should be, hey, I'm going to have asparagus tonight. I wonder what lean protein goes with asparagus. Instead of, well, I'm going to have salmon, I'll have some asparagus with my salmon.
And Rob, you mentioned this too, the importance of the vegetables also, not only from a caloric value, et cetera, but you sort of touched on momentarily about the inflammation factor and the phytonutrients that are associated with the plants, and what that implication is for possible injury, recovery, just, beating our bodies up on a daily basis, especially in the sport of wrestling. If we're not adequately supplying our bodies with those phytonutrients to limit that inflammation, we're going to suffer for that. Is that not true?
That is absolutely true, Coach. So the phytonutrients are important, and there's been a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot. There's been data out there on different phytonutrients like quercetin that's in the red skin of apples and red onions and anthocyanins, and not only for the anti-inflammatory effect, but the antioxidant effects as well. And obviously athletes are going to have more radical oxygenated species, and so tearing down their at the cellular level. So these are things that and people will say, well, I don't feel any different. I ate all vegetables yesterday and I don't feel any different. Well, it's happening at a cellular level. You're not going to feel it. It's kind of like, Mike, you say you're talking about feeding your microbiome. Yeah, you're not going to feel when your microbiome is, you're going to feel when it's not okay, but when it's okay, you're not feeling anything in your microbiome. It's just happily doing its job. And that's the same with fruits and veg, is especially the veg, is it's just happily doing its job. Like, you're eating it, you're absorbing it, you're assimilating it, and it's going through your body, and it's taking care of its business. You're not going to feel anything. And I think a lot of times when athletes want to feel something, and we can talk about dietary supplements. I know Mike and I have had a lot of conversations about that. There was a dietary supplement out there that some of the athletes were using, and it caused like tingling on their skin, right? And the company actually can take that side effect out, but they didn't, because when they took it out, the athletes used it and they didn't feel the tingling, so they said it didn't work, right? So the company actually added the side effect back to the product, because it wasn't that bad a side effect. It was just a tingling of the skin. But without that, the athlete felt like it didn't work, so their sales went down. So the company added it back. And it's just super interesting. But yeah, food is, you've heard the old adage, I think it was Hippocrates, I might be wrong, but that food is medicine, right? And I 100% believe that. But what you have to understand is food is not a pharmaceutical. Food is a medicine. It's not a pharmaceutical. Pharmaceuticals act fast. That's what they are. They're drugs that are targeted to act very quickly, right? Foods act over time. So when you eat beets, you get a vasodilation effect, and it helps with blood flow. And if you do that every week, you're helping the blood flow through your arteries and veins. Great. But you can't eat beets once and think, I'm good. That's not how foods work. Foods are chronic. And this is why when people talk about longevity and blue zones and Mediterranean diets and things like that, these people didn't become 100 like because they ate one good meal. They had longevity in their life because they ate consistently. Consistency is the key to victory. With athletes, eat meals, with coaches' meals, with any meals, consistency is the key. And if you eat consistently well, when you have those days that you want to have the special treat, you want to go to the ballpark and have hot dogs and French fries and have sodas or whatever, that one day doesn't make a difference.
Rob,
because you're consistently eating well.
That message has to get out. I mean, and whether it's an athlete or just an individual, especially for our coaches, I think, because that's a population that obviously we're trying to address, and we want to keep our coaches healthy so that they can continue to give back over time. How important, man, that message of just consistently eating, and I guess in the stack of it all, that we know that food in some situations, it's just there for existence. Like you take a bum off the street and in order to bring him back to life, whatever you feed him, just through caloric value, it's of some value to him. But then the next level is like fuel for our bodies, for energy to better perform. But you even mentioned this, even kind of from an epigenetical factor, food can also be information. Food is actually telling what genes to turn on or turn off for all kinds of things, whether it's cancer, longevity, it doesn't matter. It's like that over time makes all the difference in the world. I'm glad you touched on that.
I'm interested too, in addition to this, a lot of coaches have goals for the programs, and to get an athlete to a certain weight helps them accomplish the team program goal. We had a podcast where Tim Johnson said, if you're managing relationships, it's not a program, because you're dealing with each individual, you're building relationships. programs don't really take that into as much consideration. So I know that big push, and I've seen athletes, we've all seen athletes that coaches have said, man, if you can get down to this weight, it's going to be great for the team. But it ends up costing both the athlete and sometimes the team anyway, because it just demotivates. And Doc Bennett said to me one time, he goes, our sport's tough enough without throwing extreme weight loss and some of these things into it. And it just doesn't help us market the sport either. So I guess when we're a coach looking at these things, what kind of advice would you give a coach? And especially if they're looking, men are different, but to be pulling weight off of this growth for females, especially these young females with, long-term reproductive issues. So what do coaches really need to hear about this concept of weight cutting? And I love what we say is more nutrition management. You said that, Hag says it, Gable says it. It's how we manage nutrition to meet a weight goal. But now I'll shut up and let you talk. You're the expert.
Well, first I want to make sure you can hear me because my headphones went dead. Can you hear me?
We're good.
Okay,
absolutely.
Great. Okay, so Mike, you were there. We talk about weight management to competition. We don't. I know that it's a culture of weight cutting, but the reality is, it's weight management to competition. That's what we're doing, and there's some pretty hard numbers out there. Like the data from Australia, a guy named Rial, I think he works for UFC now. But he did a lot of really good studies, and he showed that for acute rapid weight loss. Now, acute rapid weight loss is really what weight cutting, like that is the saunas and that's the everything that we all get concerned about. But if you're above 10% of your competition weight. And high schools are different, colleges are different because they compete weekly. But for us at the national team level, our goal was you should be between 7 and 10%. Because if you're within 7 or 10%, you're in striking distance within a few weeks. We know we can get you there. We know you can do it. The one thing I learned, and I had very limited work with wrestlers before I came to the Olympic Training Center. The one thing I learned was you never tell a wrestler that they can't make a weight, right? Because they will make the weight. They'll suffer. They'll do everything they can. They will make the weight. I used to have athletes come to me and say, look, I know you can make the weight. The question is it the weight you should make? Mm-hmm. And so what we did was, and I think this is where body composition becomes a very valuable tool. What we looked at was their body composition, lean weight, fat weight. And we said, if you only lost fat, what would your percent body fat be? And we know we've got ranges for males and females that are too low, right? 3 to 5% for males and 10 to 12% for females. That's essential fat. That's essential. That means essential, like I said about the amino acids and the fatty acids, essential. And that essential fat means you have to have it for normal hormone production. You have to. And once you go below that, if you stay there too long, like a lot of fighters, MMA and judo, and a lot of fighters will what I call touch the curtain and then pull back, right? They'll get to 5% and then they'll pull back and gain the weight back. But if you touch 5% for a male or 10% for a female and you stay there too long, there's going to be long-term reproductive concerns, especially for the females. For the males, what we typically see is nagging soft tissue injuries. They don't recover from things that they would normally recover because they're staying way too low. A lot of that is because they're in such a caloric deficit that they're not getting what they need to repair. So for coaches that I know coaches aren't intentionally pushing kids, or they shouldn't be, but I know I believe coaches get into coaching for good reasons. I don't believe coaches get in there to make someone do something they don't want to do. However, I would say it's a very fine line. Coaches need to really understand that look at the person, look at the growth phase they're in, especially high schools. Kids are growing every year. I mean, we've got a pretty good national team wrestler that was in college, and every year he went up a weight class and he did pretty well. That's really shows how a person in their growth, if you work on your technical and tactical skills, moving up shouldn't hurt you that much if it's part of your normal growth phase. Falsely staying too low in a weight class will eventually catch up to you. Eventually, you won't have the energy to compete with the people who are normally that weight. This is why, in my opinion, from seeing the Japanese women team do their work, Japan's women's team is so good at what they do because they're good at the very small weights, right? Because genetically, that's how they're built. The Japanese women's team, they get people who are not cutting a lot of weight. They maintain within kilos of their weight class. So I think that's why they're number one in the world, really, in women's wrestling. When they get to the bigger weight classes, obviously other teams take over there because they don't have – I don't think they have the capacity to be that big and strong.
Yeah.
We do.
Rob, we're gonna obviously have to tie this up here pretty quick. But here's the thing: I'm going to ask you one last question, and from that question, I would also like to get you back on the show again. I would.
Yeah,
I mean, you're a guy that's just a wealth of knowledge, and I know our coaches and our community could really benefit hearing more information in this regards. And I feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface even today. But I'm going to ask you this last question, and you can go in any direction that you want to with it. It is a question that could be in nutrition, sports performance, in whatever direction you want to go, strength training. What are a couple of the biggest myths that we're currently dealing with when it comes to our athletes and coaching?
Okay, I would say for nutrition, I would say one of the biggest myths is carbohydrates make you fat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so with that, it's true, but it's wrong as well. Carbohydrates, protein, or fat consumed, overconsumed, all will be converted to fat. Protein's less likely to be converted to fat, but it still will be converted to fat. And so when you get into the biochemistry of that, it's pretty interesting because fat is just a sugar backbone with 3 fatty acids, the triglyceride, right? So yes, carbohydrates will be converted to fat, but so will protein and so will fat. And we're not wanting to talk about alcohol, but alcohol is in there too. I think when people go on ketogenic diets have a purpose. They've been shown to help with epilepsy and some other diseases. And we know that 5 to 7 days of a ketogenic diet will not reduce performance. So we strategically use those at the end of a management to competition. We'll strategically use low carbohydrate meal plans. But going on a low carbohydrate meal plan for an extended amount of time doesn't seem to be any different than low fat or high protein or any other diet after about a year. It will rapidly cause you to lose weight because your glycogen stores shrink. And when your glycogen stores shrink, so does the amount of water inside your muscle, which is not necessarily a good thing for athletes because once a muscle is a little dehydrated, it's like beef jerky. It's really easy to pull apart. But if you took a steak and tried to pull it apart, you'd get that, right? Because it's still got fluid in it. So you don't want your muscles to be like beef jerky. You want them to be like that steak. And so I would say that's probably one of the biggest myths. I think we're coming out of that now. But yeah, I also think doing long, slow distance cardiovascular work, like boxers call it road work, all the time, it doesn't help you become faster. And your judo, boxing, and wrestling, especially at Olympic level, but at every level, are fast sports. They are fast. You got to go. You don't just jog, right? You go. You're on the mat, you go. So I think if you want to be fast, you got to train fast. And if you don't supplement your long, slow distance with some kind of intervals, sprint intervals, you're probably making a mistake.
Even at an older age, I've even added in more what I would consider cardio, but in a non-chronic cardio state, like much more higher intensity with Tabata training and stuff like that. So
exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic, Rob. Man, this has been just a privilege and an absolute honor to have you join us today. Yeah, no, seriously. And I know that we're going to get some questions about when are you going to get that guy back on again. We'll try to work out our schedules to make it happen. Mike, thanks for turning Rob on to us and getting him on the show. Real quick, before we do sign off, Mike, do you have anything, updates from Colorado Springs? What's happening from Coaches Education? Anything of news that we need to report on?
You bet. Yeah, we got the Greg Strobel Leadership Academy fundraiser that's going on, and we're in the last days of that opportunity. And these funds are going to go to support our senior team athletes on those gap areas that aren't really designed to be, coaching or OTC training gaps. So we're really excited for that. And there'll be some other information in the checkbox down below. And Rob, certainly any links to social media that you think are important for us to share with our coaches, shoot us a note and we'll make sure we get those in the description for everybody as well. We want this to be a great resource for our coaches, and an hour with you should go a long way.
That's great. I really appreciate you guys having me on. And Mike, you got to tell Bill Zadek to send me a text.
I will.
I don't know if he's avoiding me. I don't know if he's mad at me, but I hadn't had any text from him in 6 months, so I miss him.
He's been pretty busy. I think a new baby and a foot surgery and all sorts of stuff. So I'll make sure that he gets in touch with you.
All right. Thanks.
Well, for Rob, Mike, thanks again, guys. Look forward to the next opportunity. Until next time, everybody, this has been our Heads Up podcast sponsored by our USA Wrestling Coaches Council. Take care.